The storm was still echoing against the stone walls of Stormvale when Elara Winford realized every eye in the grand hall had turned to her. Dozens of nobles froze mid-movement, gazes sharpened, breaths held, as if time itself had been arrested. At the center of that suspended moment stood Princess Seraphina Rowan, her silk gown shimmering beneath the candlelight, her expression trembling with something between disbelief and awe. And then, without hesitation, Seraphina dropped to her knees before Elara. The sound of the princess's gown brushing the marble floor sliced through the silence like a blade. Gasps erupted. A few voices choked. Adrian Valamon, standing only a step behind Elara, stiffened with a shock he managed to hide from everyone except her. She felt his presence like a shield, warm and steady, though his own pulse had quickened. "Elara Winford," the princess whispered, her voice breaking in a way no royal voice should. "If what I believe is true, then I must kneel before you." The hall exploded with noise. Chairs scraped. Fans snapped shut. Somewhere in the back of the room a man muttered a prayer. Elara's heart lurched violently, her breath catching as if an invisible hand had gripped her lungs. None of this made sense. None of this belonged to her. She was only a girl from Brindlebrook, a girl who had never dreamed of marble halls or royal kneeling. Adrian stepped forward, placing a steadying hand against her back. "Elara," he murmured under the chaos, "don't move." Her voice trembled. "I don't understand. Why is she?" But the answer did not come. The hall dissolved into confusion, questions, accusations. The world tilted. And then, as if summoned from the eye of that storm, a memory surfaced, one that pulled Elara backward, far away from this marble hall, back to the moment her life began to shift. It had started 3 days earlier, though at the time, she could not have guessed how deeply her steps would echo inside a world she had never imagined entering. The morning had been ordinary, the kind of morning Brindlebrook villagers no longer remembered once night fell. Elara was on her way to speak with the innkeeper, a man whose frown deepened each time he saw her approaching. Her family had fallen behind on payments, and though she'd worked tirelessly, the debt loomed like a storm cloud refusing to break. She had hoped for understanding, perhaps mercy. Instead, she had walked into an argument waiting to happen. "Another delay, Miss Winford? Promises don't settle accounts," the innkeeper snapped. "I only ask for 1 more week," Elara answered softly, clutching her shawl against the cold draft. "The harvest is late this season. My brothers are trying." The innkeeper scoffed. "Everyone has excuses. You think yours are special?" Elara swallowed her frustration. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. She was seconds away from offering to work additional hours when the front door creaked open, letting in a gust of wind and a man whose presence shifted the room instantly. Lord Adrian Valamon. Elara recognized him only because everyone recognized him. The noble of Greyhaven, quiet, self-contained, rumored to be as cold as the lands he governed. She had never seen him up close, but the innkeeper immediately straightened his posture, wiping his hands against his apron, as if he had suddenly discovered dignity. "My lord," the innkeeper sputtered. "Forgive me had I known." Adrian's eyes, dark and unreadable, barely flicked to him before settling on Elara with a steady, curious focus. "Is there trouble here?" His voice wasn't sharp, merely attentive, but the innkeeper blanched under it. "No trouble, my lord. Just village matters." Elara wished she could disappear. The last thing she needed was attention from a noble. Attention never led to anything good. But Adrian did not leave. He did not even glance away. Instead, he stepped closer and asked, "What is your name?" "Elara Winford, my lord. And you are burdened with a debt you cannot immediately pay." Her cheeks flushed with humiliation. "Yes, but we will manage. We always do." Something unreadable flickered in his eyes, a quiet recognition, perhaps even respect. He studied her with a solemn thoroughness she didn't understand. "Tell me," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "if given the chance to resolve your family's debt swiftly and honorably, would you take it?" Elara hesitated. "Honorably, my lord?" "Yes." She tried to read his expression but found nothing except sincerity stripped of ornament. "I would," she whispered at last. Adrian nodded once, as if he had reached a conclusion he'd been weighing long before he ever entered the inn. "Then I have a proposition," he said. "I require someone sensible and composed to accompany me to a wedding at Stormvale. It is not a demanding task, merely your presence. In return, I will settle your debts immediately." The entire inn fell silent. Elara felt the world narrow to a single point. A nobleman asking a village girl to accompany him to a royal wedding. It made no sense. It sounded like a story mothers warned their daughters not to believe. But Adrian Valamon did not look like a man who made false promises. Ilara's voice nearly failed. "Why me?" "Because you do not pretend," he said simply, "and I am tired of pretense." The words lodged deep in her chest. 3 days later she said yes, and that yes had eventually led her here to Stormvale, to chaos, to a kneeling princess, to whispers that claimed she might be someone she never believed possible, all because of a moment in a quiet inn, all because Adrian Valamon had looked at her and seen something she did not yet know she possessed. The carriage wheels hummed steadily beneath them as Stormvale's distant spires emerged through folds of morning mist. Ilara Winford had never seen a structure so vast it seemed to command the horizon. From the moment they crested the final hill, the estate rose like a world unto itself, arched windows catching the pale winter light, banners drifting with muted elegance, stone towers cutting clean lines against the sky. Lord Adrian Valamon watched her quietly from across the carriage. He hadn't spoken much since they departed Brindlebrook, but there was nothing cold in his silence. It was a calm, unintrusive presence, as if he wished to give her the grace to feel her own thoughts. Ilara clasped her hands in her lap. "Is this truly where the wedding will take place?" "Yes," Adrian replied, his voice even. "Stormvale has hosted every royal celebration for generations. Today is no exception." She tried to swallow the nervousness rising in her throat. "It seems like a place made for people who never stumble." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "All places are meant for those willing to walk into them." The words steadied her more than he perhaps realized. The carriage rolled past the outer gates. Servants hurried along the pathways, moving with a rhythm that suggested practiced precision. Every figure wore garments finer than anything Ilara had ever seen. She felt the weight of it all pressing softly against her beauty, expectation, the quiet judgment woven into every corner of noble life. When the carriage stopped, Adrian stepped out first and extended his hand toward her. She hesitated for a single heartbeat before taking it. His grasp was firm, confident, not commanding, but assuring. "Remember," he murmured, "you do not walk behind me here. You walk beside." Ilara tried to hold those words close as they entered the grand foyer. Inside, the air changed. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Fabrics rustled like the shifting of restless birds. She felt every stare settle upon her with the weight of a question no one dared voice aloud. A pair of noblewomen approached them almost immediately, tall, graceful, and dressed in shades of winter gold. Their movements suggested they belonged to a world where nothing ever rushed, where every gesture was deliberate and polished. "Lord Valamon," one of them said, tilting her head with careful elegance. "Your arrival is noted, and your companion." "Ilara Winford," Adrian answered, offering no embellishment. "She accompanies me to the wedding." The women exchanged a glance too quick to hide. "From which family?" the second asked lightly, though her eyes held a sharper curiosity. "I do not recall the name Winford among the northern lines." Ilara opened her mouth, but Adrian spoke first. "She is not of our circles, Lady Hawthorne, and that is of no consequence to her ability to be here." Lady Hawthorne's smile chilled slightly. "Of course, my lord. One must appreciate variety among the guests." With that thin remark, both women drifted away like silk caught in a draught. Ilara exhaled slowly. "I think I stepped on something delicate without realizing it." "You did nothing wrong," Adrian said. "Their discomfort is their own burden, not yours." "Oh." But discomfort was not the only thing lingering around her. The moment they walked deeper into the foyer, a cluster of younger nobles whispered among themselves. Their eyes followed Ilara with a mix of speculation and something else she could not name, unease perhaps, or memory. She had seen such looks only once before, years ago, when an unexpected stranger had passed through Brindlebrook and stared at her as if she resembled someone long lost. Adrian noticed the stares too. His expression darkened subtly. "Stay close," he murmured. They entered the great hall, where preparations for the evening festivities were underway. Musicians tuned their instruments on a raised platform. Long tables were arranged beneath chandeliers that shimmered like frozen constellations. Everything around her felt impossibly refined, and yet Ilara sensed a strange tension beneath the surface, as if the estate itself had braced for something. An elderly steward approached Adrian with a respectful bow. "My lord, your chambers are prepared. And for the young lady, shall we place her in the east wing?" Adrian shook his head. "The west wing. A room near mine, so she may request anything she needs." The steward's brows lifted a fraction, but he bowed again without comment. When he walked away, Adrian turned to Ilara. You will have privacy, warmth, and safety. Should anything trouble you, even the smallest matter, you come to me immediately." She nodded, touched by the quiet sincerity behind his words. "I will." As they moved through the hall, Ilara's gaze drifted upward and froze. At the balcony above, a young man dressed in formal attire leaned over the railing, staring at her with a stunned expression. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. "Adrian," she whispered. He followed her gaze. The young man blinked, regained composure, and hurried away before Adrian could approach. "Ilara," Adrian said softly, "has anyone ever reacted to you like that before?" She shook her head, though motion felt heavy. "Not like that, but once, years ago, someone in Brindlebrook stared at me strangely, then left without speaking." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Stormvale is full of people who thrive on secrets. Pay no mind to glances you do not understand. Gin." But as he led her toward the stairway, Ilara could not ignore the sensation curling deep within her, an uneasy tug, as if threads long hidden were beginning to pull free. Whatever Stormvale held for her, the unraveling had only just begun. Ilara's room in the West Wing overlooked Stormvale's inner gardens, a quiet stretch of winter roses and frost-treated hedges that shimmered faintly beneath the late afternoon sun. The chamber itself was far larger than anything she had ever stepped into, yet despite the grandeur, she felt a tremor beneath her ribs, a reminder that beauty did not always soften unfamiliarity. She set her small bag on the bed, unsure whether she should unpack or simply stand still. The room felt too silent, too watchful, perhaps because her own thoughts echoed so loudly within it. Everything she had seen since stepping into the estate had left a faint pressure on her chest, as though pieces of a puzzle she had never known existed were shifting into place around her. A gentle knock came at the door. Before she could answer, it opened just enough for a maid to peer inside. "Miss Winford, I have been assigned to assist you during your stay." Ilara offered a tentative smile. "Thank you, but I may not need much help." The maid curtsied politely. "As you wish, miss. If you change your mind, just ring." When the door closed, Ilara sat at the edge of the bed, pressing her palms into the soft coverlet to ground herself. She had not expected nerves to grow sharper once she was alone. She had survived the stares, the whispers, the elegant cruelty beneath Lady Hawthorne's smile, yet privacy, something she was familiar with all her life, felt strangely unsettling here. A firm knock sounded again, louder this time. She rose quickly and opened the door. Adrian stood there. He had changed out of his travel coat into something far more formal, a dark vest patterned subtly with silver stitching, his expression composed but intent. "I wanted to see how you were settling," he said. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed uncertainty she hadn't intended. His brow tightened just enough to show he heard it. "If anyone has said anything improper—" "No," she said quickly. "Only looks. I suppose they were to be expected. Goat." Adrian studied her closely, then stepped inside at her silent invitation. He kept a respectful distance, yet his presence steadied the room as though he carried a quiet anchor within him. "Ilara," he said, "you must remember that you are not here to please them." "I know," she lowered her gaze, "but knowing and believing are not always the same." He didn't speak for a moment. She sensed he was choosing his words with care. "You walk into their world with honesty they are unaccustomed to," he said. "Honesty unsettles people who have spent their lives wearing masks." Her breath eased at the calm conviction in his tone. Adrian seemed to have a talent for offering clarity without intrusion. "I appreciate your saying that," she murmured. A faint knock interrupted them. The door opened a sliver, and the same maid peeked inside again. "Forgive me, miss. Lord Valamon, Her Highness Princess Serafina, requests your presence in the west drawing-room." Ilara blinked. "Princess Serafina?" The maid bowed. "Yes, miss. She was most insistent." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Did she say why?" "No, my lord. Only that she wished to speak with Miss Winford directly." Ilara felt a ripple of unease. She had only glimpsed the princess briefly earlier, surrounded by advisers and nobles. Yet even from across the hall, Serafina had watched her with a focus that bordered on disbelief. Adrian turned to Ilara. "You do not have to go alone." The maid hesitated. Her Highness requested, "Only Miss Winford." Adrian's jaw tightened at that. "I will accompany her to the door," he said, voice low but firm. The maid nodded and stepped aside. As they walked through the corridor, Ilara felt the tension rise not from fear, but from anticipation she could not shake. The West Wing halls grew quieter with each turn, lit by afternoon light spilling through stained glass windows. "Ilara, Adrian said softly as they approached a door carved with intricate patterns. "You may choose not to answer any question she asks. You are not bound by her title." Ilara gave a small nod, absorbing the reassurance. The door opened before she could knock. Princess Serafina stood inside, her gown the color of pale starlight. Her expression held neither malice nor arrogance, only an intensity that made Ilara's pulse lift. "Miss Winford," Serafina said, her voice calm yet trembling with some emotion she couldn't disguise. "Please, come in." Adrian stepped forward, but Serafina lifted a hand gently. "Alone." Ilara offered Adrian a reassuring glance. "I will be careful." His hesitation was clear, but he finally nodded. "If anything feels wrong, leave at once." Clate. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a whisper. The west drawing room was warm, lit by a fire that cast flickering light over shelves of old books and polished instruments. Serafina motioned for Ilara to sit, but she did not take her own seat. Instead, she circled once around her, studying her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through layers Ilara didn't know she carried. "I apologize if this summons feels sudden," the princess murmured, "but when I saw you earlier today, I thought I was seeing a shadow of the past." Ilara's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Serafina's lips parted slightly, as though the words weighed heavily. "You bear a resemblance to someone my family lost long ago, and I fear—" She stopped, collecting herself. "I fear that fate has brought you here for a reason none of us expected." Ilara felt the world constrict gently around her. "I don't understand." "Closed." "You will," Serafina whispered, her fingers brushing the cover of a small box she now held. "But first, I must know who you truly are." Ilara stared at the box, then at the princess, and in that quiet drawing room, she felt the first threads of her past tremble, though she still had no idea how deeply they would shake the world around her. The firelight shimmered across the polished floor as Princess Serafina Rowan held the small lacquered box between her hands. Her posture was composed, but her breaths were unsteady, as if she had rehearsed this moment and still found herself unprepared when reality arrived. Ilara Winford sat opposite her, fingers laced tightly in her lap. The quiet in the room was different from the silence of Stormvale's corridors. This was the kind of quiet that existed only before truths too heavy to ignore. Serafina placed the box gently on the table between them. "Before I open this," she began, "I must ask something of you." Ilara swallowed. "What is it, Your Highness?" "Honesty," Serafina said softly. "Not the sort demanded by etiquette, but the kind you owe only to yourself." Ilara nodded, though her heart ached with uncertainty. The princess moved closer. "Tell me, do you know anything of your birth? Anything beyond what your family has told you?" Ilara hesitated. "I only know what my mother shared, that I was born in Brindlebrook, that my father died before I came into the world, that my brothers looked after me because she was often ill." She paused, then admitted, "But she never spoke much about the early years, and I never questioned why." Serafina murmured, "Sometimes silence speaks more truth than words." Ilara tried to ignore the chill that followed those words. The princess rested her hand lightly upon the box. "My mother had a sister," she said, "Lady Isolde Rowan. She was gentle, private, and brilliant in ways most nobles failed to understand. When she gave birth to a daughter 20 years ago, there was talk of hope of what the two of them might bring to our family." Ilara listened in stillness, afraid to interrupt. "But," Serafina continued, her voice tightening, "when the child was only a few months old, tragedy struck. A fire destroyed the family's countryside estate. My Aunt Isolde died, and the child—" Her breath trembled. "The child was reported lost to the flames." Ilara felt her heart sink. "I'm sorry. That must have been—" "It was devastating," Serafina whispered, "especially for my mother, who blamed herself for not being there, and though the years passed, she never completely let go of the memory of that little girl." Ilara felt compassion stir within her. "But what does this have to do with me, Your Highness?" Serafina's gaze sharpened gently. "When I saw you earlier today, I felt as if I was staring at a portrait come to life. Your face, your eyes, even the way you hold yourself." She searched Ilara's expression carefully. "You look remarkably like Lady Isolde." Ilara's breath thinned. "That can't be. It must be coincidence." Serafina didn't argue. Instead, she opened the small box with a soft click. Inside lay an elegant silver brooch shaped like a rose dusted by frost its center, set with a pale blue stone that shimmered softly in the firelight. The sight of it sent a strange sensation spiraling through Ilara's chest, a mixture of warmth and ache, familiarity and distance. "My aunt received this on the day her daughter was born," Serafina said quietly. "It is a symbol reserved for Rowan blood, only gifted to daughters." Ilara stared at the brooch, unable to look away. "It's beautiful," she whispered, though the words felt too small for what she felt. "May I ask?" Serafina leaned closer, her voice gentle. "Were you given anything as a child? An heirloom? A keepsake? Anything unusual or not typical for your family?" Ilara shook her head slowly. "Nothing, except a ribbon my mother kept, but she never spoke of its origin." "I see." A flicker of disappointment crossed Serafina's face, though she quickly concealed it. Ilara forced a nervous breath. "Your Highness, I don't understand why you think I could be connected to your family. I'm not noble. I grew up working in a village tavern. I've never even left Brindlebrook before now." "Birth does not ask permission," Serafina murmured. "It simply is." Ilara looked down at her hands. "My mother, she was a simple woman. She would have told me if there were secrets." "Unless she could not," Serafina countered softly, "or unless she feared what revealing the truth might cost you." The room felt colder suddenly, though the fire continued to burn. Serafina reached across the table and gently placed the brooch in Ilara's open palm. The metal was cool, its weight delicate yet profound. "Ilara, I am not accusing you," the princess said, "nor am I making claims without caution. But every instinct I possess tells me that you are not here by coincidence." Ilara withdrew her hand slightly, brooch resting like a question she had never asked. "I don't want to disrupt your family," she whispered. "I don't want to be the cause of confusion or hope that leads nowhere." Serafina's expression softened. "Hope can be painful, yes, but truth demands to be found. And if there is even the slightest chance that you are part of our bloodline, I cannot ignore it." Ilara shook her head, overwhelmed. "I'm just a village girl." The princess's voice lowered to a near whisper. "And what if you're not?" The question hung in the air, heavy, impossible. For the first time since arriving at Stormvale, Ilara felt something shift inside her, not certainty, not recognition, but the faint tremor of a door cracking open in darkness. Serafina rose slowly, stepping back as though giving space to the weight of her own words. "There will be a council tomorrow," she said. "They may ask questions you do not expect, but whatever they ask, whatever they suspect, I want you to know that I will stand with you." Ilara looked up, startled. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because," Serafina whispered, "I looked at you and saw the echo of someone I loved, and I cannot turn away from that." She moved toward the door, hesitated, then added softly, "Rest for now. For both our sakes, you must gather your strength." Ilara remained seated, brooch resting in her palm as the door closed, gently behind the princess. The warmth of Stormvale felt different now, less like comfort, and more like a veil being drawn back, to reveal something she wasn't ready to see. But the truth had already begun to rise, and she sensed it would not stop. Adrian Valamon was waiting in the corridor when Ilara left the drawing room. He had been leaning against the stone archway, arms loosely folded, but he straightened instantly when he saw her pale expression. His eyes, usually steady and distant, sharpened with concern. "Ilara," he murmured, stepping toward her. "What happened?" She opened her mouth, but the words tangled inside her chest. The brooch, still cold in her palm, felt heavier than metal should ever feel. She shook her head faintly, unable to form a complete sentence. Adrian didn't press. "Come," he said quietly. "We should speak somewhere less exposed." He guided her toward an alcove, overlooking the gardens. The winter scent drifted in, sharp enough to steady her breath. She watched the distant fountains glitter beneath the fading sun, trying to gather herself. Only when she finally managed to breathe evenly did Adrian speak again. "Did the princess trouble you?" "No," Ilara whispered. "Not in the way you mean." He studied her carefully. "Then tell me what she did mean." Ilara opened her hand, revealing the brooch resting like a frozen flower on her palm. Adrian stared at it, silent at first, then visibly taken aback. "That is Rowan craftsmanship," he said slowly. "Highly restricted. Ordinary nobles rarely see such pieces, let alone hold one." "She thinks I resemble Lady Isolde," Ilara murmured, afraid to even breathe the words too loudly. "She believes there is a possibility I could be connected to the Rowan line." Adrian's eyes narrowed, not in disbelief but in calculation. He reached out, touching the brooch with a careful finger. "This is not an accusation to take lightly," he said, "nor is it something that should be spoken beyond trusted walls." I told her she must be mistaken. Elara whispered. I told her I didn't want to disturb her family. And how did she respond? She said, she cannot ignore what she believes. Adrian exhaled slowly. Stormvale thrives on suspicion. Some will twist this into whatever brings them advantage. Elara lowered her gaze. I don't want advantage. I know, he said gently. That's precisely why you deserve protection. Lexzi too. She looked up at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. He held her gaze, strong enough to steady her trembling thoughts. Before she could speak, the distant sound of a bell echoed through the corridors, signaling the beginning of the evening gathering. The hum of voices grew louder as nobles drifted toward the grand hall. Adrian straightened. We should go. Staying away will only fuel speculation. Elara wanted to protest, but she knew he was right. If she hid, her absence would be interpreted as guilt or fear or something worse. Better to walk in with dignity even if her heart thudded unevenly inside her chest. Adrian offered his arm. Until this night ends, you stay beside me, always. She placed her hand on his arm. It felt like anchoring herself to something secure amid shifting ground. As they entered the grand hall, the chatter softened just enough to signal that people had noticed their arrival. That subtle shift, the weight of 100 eyes adjusting their attention, pressed against Elara's shoulders like an invisible cloak. Clusters of nobles parted just slightly, enough to watch without fully approaching. Fans fluttered, glances sharpened. The entire hall felt like a stage awaiting an unscripted scene. Elara, Adrian murmured, bending slightly toward her. Look only at what is ahead, not at them. She nodded, though not without effort. With each step, she sensed the air tightening curiosity, suspicion, and bewilderment, all threading together. A group of young noblemen approached them first. One bowed politely to Adrian, but his attention was fixed on Elara with thinly veiled intrigue. So this is the companion you spoke of, one of them said lightly. Miss Winford, is it? Quite the stir you've caused today. Elara stiffened. Adrian replied before she could. Rumor travels faster than sense in Stormvale. I recommend you trust neither until morning. The young noble laughed, embarrassed but unwilling to retreat gracefully. Of course, my lord, but even you must admit she resembles someone. Adrian's voice cooled. Resemblances do not entitle speculation. The nobleman exchanged glances and stepped aside. Elara's pulse quickened. I told myself they would be polite, she whispered. They do not know how, Adrian said quietly. More nobles drifted near Lady Hawthorne among them. She assessed Elara with a look sharpened to a blade. My dear Miss Winford, she said in a voice sweetened with insincerity, you've captured quite the attention, rare for someone with such modest origins. Elara tried to hold herself steady. I am simply a guest, my lady. For now, Lady Hawthorne replied, but attention has a way of revealing more than it conceals. Adrian stepped closer to Elara, his presence unmistakably protective. Lady Hawthorne, find another pastime. Miss Winford is here as my guest, and I will not tolerate slander disguised as courtesy. The lady's smile faded, replaced with a stiff nod before she retreated. Despite Adrian's defense, the whispers grew louder behind them, threads of speculation weaving into something heavier. A string quartet began to play, but even the music felt strained beneath the tension threading the room. Elara's gaze shifted toward the central staircase and froze. Standing at the top of the stairs was the young man she had seen earlier from the balcony. He stared at her again, his eyes wide, his breath visibly caught. This time he brought a hand to his chest as if trying to steady himself. Elara, Adrian murmured, noticing her distraction. What is it? She couldn't answer. The young man's expression wasn't mere surprise. It bordered on recognition. Deep, unsettling, impossible recognition. He took a step forward. Adrian's voice sharpened. Stay with me. But the music, the crowd, the hall, it all seemed to dim around her as the young man continued descending. His gaze locked onto hers with something she did not understand, something that made the air itself tremble. And Elara sensed, with sudden and chilling certainty, that the questions surrounding her were only beginning to surface. The young man descended the staircase one slow step at a time, each movement pulled by a gravity Elara could not explain. Around them, conversations faltered. A violinist missed a note. Even the flickering candelabras seemed to steady their flames, as though waiting for something inevitable. Elara, Adrian murmured again, quieter now, as if raising his voice might provoke whatever was about to unfold. Do not step away from me. She didn't intend to, but her breath had become shallow, and her feet felt as though they had fused to the floor. The young man reached the last step. He was close now, close enough that she could see the tremor in his hands, the way his pupils expanded with disbelief. He looked at her as though he were seeing someone returned from the dead. Without meaning to, Ilara whispered, "Do I know you?" The young man didn't answer at first. He only stared. Then his lips parted, and in a strained, breathless tone he said, "You look exactly like her." Before Ilara could ask who he meant, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Lord Arik, Gurt." A woman clad in emerald green silk swept toward them, her expression a perfect blend of authority and alarm. Her eyes flicked to Ilara only briefly before she gripped the young man's arm. "You are needed elsewhere," she hissed under her breath. Arik shook her off, still staring at Ilara. "She looks like Lady Isolde. That is enough." The woman's tone sharpened. "Do not involve yourself in matters you do not understand. Copine." Adrian stepped between Arik and Ilara, his voice cool but controlled. "Lord Arik, if you have something to say, speak plainly." Arik drew a breath as though trying to steady himself. He opened his mouth, but the older woman seized him firmly and pulled him back. "My apologies, Lord Valamon," she said tightly. "My nephew becomes overly fascinated by resemblance and legend. Stormvale's history has made him superstitious. Nothing more." Her smile was an elegant lie. Adrian didn't return it. Superstition does not produce shock. Ilara felt heat gather beneath her skin. Arik's reaction was too visceral, too raw to be anything as simple as superstition. Before she could ask anything more, the woman steered him away through the crowd. The hall slowly regained its air of forced normalcy, but the whispers had already begun to gather like sparks waiting for tinder. "What was that?" Ilara whispered. "Something we will address privately," Adrian replied, his voice low, his expression guarded. "For now, follow me." But they had barely taken a step when a servant rushed forward, breathless, nervous, eyes darting between them. "Lord Valamon, Miss Winford, the council requests your presence." Ilara's chest tightened. "Now?" "Yes, miss, immediately." Adrian's hand curled protectively around hers. "What is the meaning of this? They were to convene tomorrow." I do not know, my lord." The servant's gaze shifted nervously toward the far end of the hall, but the message was urgent. Adrian murmured, "This is too sudden," then turned to Ilara. "Remember what I said. I am with you." His reassurance steadied her slightly, but tension still coiled tight in her stomach as they followed the servant. The music faded behind them, replaced by the distant rustle of their steps and the murmur of voices behind closed doors. They were led to a smaller chamber near the council wing. The moment the door opened, Ilara felt the temperature drop not physically, but through the cold formality of the gathered nobles. Half a dozen council members stood waiting. Lady Hawthorne was among them. Her eyes gleamed like polished steel. "Lord Valamon," said the eldest councillor, "forgive the interruption to your evening, but a matter has been brought to our attention that cannot wait." Adrian stepped forward. "Then say it plainly." The councillor turned toward Ilara. "Miss Winford, we understand you had a private audience with Princess Seraphina earlier today." Ilara's breath stalled for a moment. "Yes, Your Excellency, and during this audience, certain topics of lineage were discussed." Ilara hesitated. "If you mean resemblance, then yes, she mentioned her aunt." Lady Hawthorne's voice cut in, smooth and sharp. "She did not merely mention resemblance. She bestowed a Rowan heirloom upon you." Ilara stiffened. "I did not ask for it." Croot. "That does not matter," Hawthorne replied. "What matters is what such an heirloom implies." Adrian stepped forward. "Her Highness acted out of emotion, not evidence. Do not twist her sentiment into suspicion." A middle-aged lord cleared his throat. "We do not accuse the young woman of wrongdoing, but Stormvale has suffered enough from false heirs in the past." He turned to Ilara. "We must know whether Princess Seraphina acted upon some credible basis, or whether you have influenced her judgment." Ilara flinched. "I influenced nothing. I barely know her." Lady Hawthorne's gaze narrowed. "Then perhaps you could explain why Lord Arik Rowan reacted so strongly upon seeing you tonight." Ilara froze. She had not expected them to learn of that so quickly. Adrian's expression hardened. "Hawthorne, if you think Ilara orchestrated a resemblance, you insult your own intelligence." Hawthorne ignored him. "Miss Winford, answer the question. Have you met Lord Arik before this evening?" "No," Ilara breathed. "Never. Yet he addressed you as though seeing a ghost." Ilara's voice trembled. "I cannot control how other people look at me." "That remains to be seen," Hawthorne murmured. The elder councillor raised a hand, silencing the room. "We will not decide anything today, but Miss Winford must be prepared to answer questions tomorrow. There have been whispers for decades of the Rowan child lost to fire, and now, A young woman with an uncanny resemblance appears at Stormvale, attached to a lord of influence. Ilara felt her skin prickle. Whispers do not make truth. The counselor studied her. Indeed, which is why the truth must be found. Adrian spoke firmly. She will not stand alone. The counselor nodded slowly. Lord Valamon, you are welcome to accompany her. But for tonight, Miss Winford should retire to her chambers. No further interaction with other guests. No additional rumors. A dismissal disguised as courtesy. Adrian guided her away before Hawthorne could offer another pointed remark. As soon as they stepped into the corridor, Ilara leaned against the wall, her breath trembling. Adrian, she whispered, what is happening to me? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Stormvale is a place where history clings to every shadow. You walked into one of those shadows without knowing it. But he didn't, Mentor. I know, he said gently, and that is why I will not let them turn this against you. His steady confidence settled her pulse, but only slightly. The hall felt colder now, as though Stormvale itself had begun to awaken to something long buried, and Ilara had the terrible sense that tomorrow would unearth far more than she was ready to face. Ilara did not sleep. Stormvale felt different at night, its corridors too still, its lanterns burning with a muted glow that cast long, wavering shadows across carved stone. She sat near the window of her chamber, wrapped in a shawl, trying to calm the tremors threading through her hands. Dawn approached slowly, painting faint silver streaks across the garden below. The estate had grown silent after the gathering, but the echoes of the council's interrogation clung to her thoughts. When a soft knock sounded, she already knew it was Adrian. She opened the door to find him standing there, not in formal attire this time, but in a simple dark coat. His expression was composed, but beneath the surface, she sensed something like restrained fury, anger carefully caged. You haven't rested, he said quietly. Ilara shook her head. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Lady Hawthorne's voice all over again. Adrian stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Hawthorne thrives on stirring doubt. It gives her influence she does not deserve. She made it sound as if I came here with intent, Ilara whispered. As if I wanted to manipulate Serafina, or stir up some old story. You did none of those things. His voice held an edge, controlled, but unmistakably protective. Ilara walked toward the window. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people choose to believe. She hesitated before adding, what will they ask me today? Adrian joined her by the window. The faint light caught the seriousness in his eyes. They will try to confirm whether Serafina's instinct has merit. They will ask about your childhood, your mother, your past. They may even try to unsettle you intentionally, to see if you falter. Ilara swallowed. And if I do, then they will use it against you. He paused. But that does not mean you will falter. Kamuzi. The quiet conviction in his tone steadied her heartbeat. Come, he said softly. You should eat something. It will help. She followed him down the corridor, her steps slow, her mind heavy. Servants moved briskly through the hallways, preparing for the wedding rehearsal later that afternoon. When they saw Ilara, their expressions shifted not unkindly, but cautious, curious. Word had traveled. Adrian guided her into a small breakfast room, reserved for private guests. He asked for tea and warm bread, but Ilara could barely swallow a mouthful. She tried, but her stomach resisted. You should force nothing, Adrian murmured, noticing her struggle. Ilara managed a faint nod. When will they call for me? Adrian's response came almost immediately before he could speak. A guard appeared in the doorway. His posture was too rigid for a simple household errand. Lord Valamon, Miss Winford. He bowed slightly. The Royal Council requests your presence in the Assembly Chamber. Ilara's breath caught. Already? Yes, miss, they are waiting. Adrian rose first. We will go at once, but understand this. He looked directly at the guard. Miss Winford does not answer anything without my presence. The guard nodded once. His Majesty approved your attendance, my lord. That alone startled Ilara. The king is involved? Adrian's jaw tightened. He should not be this soon. Crew. The walk to the Assembly Chamber felt longer than it was. The closer they drew, the more Ilara sensed the gravity of what awaited her. At the end of the hall, tall double doors stood open, the morning light spilling through the windows to illuminate a semicircle of council members. Princess Serafina was among them, and at the center, seated in a high-backed chair, was the king. Ilara froze. Adrian placed a steady hand at the small of her back. Forward, he murmured. Slowly. They stepped inside. Murmurs quieted. The king raised a hand, and the chamber fell completely still. "Miss Winford," he began, his tone deep and measured. "Be seated." She obeyed, though her legs trembled beneath her skirt. Adrian sat beside her. The king studied her in silence for several moments, not unkind, but searching. "You were brought here today because questions have arisen regarding your origins. While the matter remains uncertain, we must approach it with clarity." Quote. Ilara nodded carefully. "Your Majesty, I have no wish to disturb the order of this place." A faint shadow of sympathy crossed the king's expression. "That may be so, but order has already been disturbed, not by your doing, but by the resemblance pointed out by my daughter." Seraphina's cheeks reddened slightly, though she held her composure. Lady Hawthorne stepped forward with a document. "Your Majesty, the principal concerns are simple. Miss Winford bears a remarkable likeness to Lady Isolde Rowan, particularly around the eyes and jawline. Furthermore, both Her Highness and Lord Arrick identified this resemblance independently." Lord Arrick. His name alone made Ilara's pulse jump. The king held out his hand for the document. Hawthorne placed it before him. "And," Hawthorne continued, "Princess Seraphina entrusted Miss Winford with a Rowan heirloom meant only for those of the bloodline." Seraphina stiffened. "I entrusted it out of instinct, not title." The king lifted his head. "Instinct alone is not proof." He turned his gaze to Ilara. "Miss Winford, I will ask you plainly, do you have any memory of a life before Brindlebrook?" "No, Your Majesty," she said. "I only remember my mother's cottage." And her voice. "Nothing before." The king nodded slowly. "And did your mother ever speak of the day you were born?" "No. She said nothing except that it was a difficult time, that she wished to forget the past." A murmur passed through the council members. Hawthorne leaned forward. "Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Adrian's tone turned cold. "Lady Hawthorne, you forget your place. She stands before a king, not your suspicion." The king raised a hand, silencing further bickering. "I must ask another question," he said, voice deepening. "This will determine how we proceed." Ilara braced herself. "Miss Winford," the king said, "are you willing to submit to an inquiry into your lineage?" Ilara's breath caught. Adrian leaned closer, whispering, "You do not have to agree." But her eyes remained fixed on the king. She had never asked for this, never sought identity beyond the life she lived, but walking away now might strengthen the belief that she had something to hide. Ilara lifted her chin, softly but firmly. "If such an inquiry is necessary to bring truth to light, then, yes, Your Majesty, I consent." The chamber rippled with whispers. The king nodded. "Very well. The inquiry will begin tomorrow morning before the wedding assembly." His expression softened. "Until then, you will remain under the protection of Lord Valamon." Adrian's eyes met hers with quiet assurance. The king dismissed the council. As they left the chamber together, Ilara's head spun. "Adrian," she whispered, "have a mother mistak?" His voice was low, steady, unwavering. "No, you have done the bravest thing a person can do." She wanted to believe him, but courage, she realized, had a weight she had never carried before, and Stormvale intended to test how far she could bear it. The gardens behind Stormvale glowed faintly beneath the late afternoon light, their winter roses blooming in muted shades of silver and pale crimson. Ilara wandered along one of the narrow stone paths, hoping the chilled air might calm the restless pulse within her. After the council's questioning, she felt hollow, as though her thoughts were scattered pieces she could not gather fast enough. She paused near a fountain shaped like a pair of swans, its water glimmering despite the cold. Her reflection trembled on the surface. The face staring back was hers, and yet not entirely hers anymore. Not to the eyes of Stormvale, not to the whispers now swirling around her name. Footsteps approached from behind. "Ilara." She turned. Adrian stood a few steps away, framed by the bare branches and fading light. His expression softened when their eyes met, though worry shadowed his posture. "I thought I might find you here," he said. She managed a faint smile. "I needed a moment away from walls and stairs." "I understand." Adrian stepped closer. The council was more forceful than they had any right to be. Ilara shook her head. Their questions were fair. Their tone, perhaps not, but fair enough. "You are far more forgiving than any of them deserve," he murmured. For a short stretch, neither spoke. The rustle of leaves filled the silence, along with the distant hum of preparations for the wedding. Servants hurried across the grounds with garlands and linens, unaware of the storm brewing in the shadows of the castle. Ilara lowered herself onto the stone edge of the fountain. "Adrian, what happens if they discover something? Or if they find nothing at all?" He stood beside her, gaze fixed on the gardens. Truth rarely appears as cleanly as people expect. Sometimes it offers only more questions. Are you saying there may be no answer? I'm saying, Adrian replied gently, that even if they find the truth, it may not be the truth you imagined. Lot. His words carried an undercurrent that tightened her chest, not unkind, but honest. Before Elara could respond, hurried footsteps approached along the path. A guard emerged, followed closely by Princess Serafina. Her gown swept behind her in a halo of pale blue silk, and though she moved with grace, her expression was tense. Elara, Serafina called softly. The urgency in her voice made Elara rise immediately. Your Highness? Serafina stopped just a breath away. Her gaze flickered between Elara and Adrian, and she drew in a steadying breath. There is something you must both know, she said. The Royal Council has changed its plans. Adrian's tone hardened. Changed in what way? Serafina hesitated. They wish to address the matter of Miss Winford's lineage tonight, before the wedding assembly. Elara felt the air in her lungs thin. Tonight? Yes, Serafina said. They intend to summon the entire noble court. They wish to present you publicly, to avoid further rumor. Adrian's jaw clenched. They are accelerating this intentionally. Are they hoping to corner her before she can defend herself properly? Serafina looked pained. Some members believe transparency will calm the crowd. Others believe it will protect the Rowan name. She lowered her voice. But one or two, Lady Hawthorne included, wish to expose Elara before the king can intervene. Elara pressed a hand to her chest. Your Highness, I cannot stand in front of all of them tonight. Serafina took her hand gently. I know, and I am truly sorry, but I came to warn you before a guard arrived at your door. The council plans to summon you at the beginning of the evening gathering. Adrian stepped between them slightly. No, she will not face them alone. She won't, Serafina insisted. The king will be present, and I will stand with her if she allows it. Quote. Elara tried to breathe deeply, but fear pressed tightly against her ribs. Why must this happen so soon? Why not wait until morning? Because, Serafina whispered, some believe appearances matter more than truth. They think presenting you tonight will prevent chaos at the wedding. Elara's voice trembled. But it will cause chaos. Adrian touched her shoulder, his voice steady. You are strong enough to face them, and I will not let them turn this into a spectacle. Go. She looked up at him at the fierce certainty in his eyes and felt a flicker of courage push through the fear. Serafina straightened. There is one more thing. A noble courier arrived an hour ago with a letter for the council. Anonymous, but sealed in old Rowan wax. No one knows what it contains. They would not tell me. Elara's breath quickened. Another letter? But the first one caused enough confusion. Quote, the council believes this one might contain information that confirms or denies your connection to the Rowan line, Serafina said grimly, which is why they intend to reveal it tonight. Adrian cursed under his breath. Elara turned away, shaking. I never wanted any of this. All I wanted was to help my family. Serafina approached her again. Elara, whatever happens tonight, remember this. You did not choose this path, but you can choose how you walk it. Adrian stepped closer. His voice softened to something that wrapped around her like warmth. You walk it with me. Elara looked at them, one a royal, one a noble, both standing beside a village girl who had stepped into a storm she never sought. She drew a slow breath. What must I do? Serafina replied. Be ready when the evening bell rings. They will call for you. Elara nodded, though fear still curled tightly inside her. Serafina gave her hand one last squeeze, then hurried away with the guard. The moment she vanished behind the hedge-lined path, Adrian turned to Elara and held her face gently between his palms. You are not alone, he said firmly. Her voice shook, but her gaze held steady. Stay with me tonight. I will not leave your side. She leaned into his hands, drawing a breath that steadied her trembling heart. Tonight, she would face a hall full of nobles. Tonight, she would hear the contents of a letter that could change everything. Tonight, truth or the shadow of it would be unveiled, and she would not face it alone. Stormvale's great hall had transformed by nightfall. Hundreds of candles burned from gilded fixtures, their flames trembling in the vast chamber like stars forced into obedience. Nobles filled every corner, robes and jewels shimmering beneath the light, fans fluttering like restless wings, whispers weaving sharp strands of tension through the air. Elara had never felt more visible, or more small. The moment she stepped through the archway with Adrian at her side, the room stilled, heads turned, conversations broke mid-sentence. The space became a single, watching presence. Adrian leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do not lower your gaze. Look only ahead." She nodded, though her throat tightened. Two royal guards guided them toward a raised platform at the far end of the hall. There, the king waited in his ceremonial attire, stern but composed. Princess Seraphina stood a few steps behind him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and dread. Lady Hawthorne stood farther to the side, posture sharpened like a drawn blade. Several council members watched with stiff anticipation. Between them all sat a small oak table, and atop it lay a sealed letter, its wax crest unmistakably Rowan. "Elaras pulses stuttard." The king lifted a hand. The hall fell into complete silence. "Tonight," he began, voice carrying through the vaulted chamber, "we gather to address a matter that has captured the attention and concern of this court." Elara felt every eye flick toward her. Adrian's presence at her shoulder anchored her. "This young woman," the king continued, "has been the subject of speculation following the events of this day. Rumors of resemblance, heirlooms exchanged, and emotional responses from members of the Rowan family have led to questions regarding her origin." The murmurs rose again, skeptical, eager, fearful. The king's next words silenced them. "An anonymous letter has been delivered to the council. It bears the old Rowan seal and claims to contain information regarding the child lost to the fire of 20 years past." Seraphina lowered her gaze. Lady Hawthorne straightened, anticipation sharpening like ice. Elara's stomach twisted. "Anonymous," she whispered. "It could be anyone." "That is why we reveal it publicly," Adrian murmured back. The king gestured to a guard. "Bring the letter." The guard stepped forward, lifted the parchment, and held it toward the king. The wax seal cracked under his thumb. The sound echoed faintly, impossibly loud. Elara gripped the edge of her gown to keep her hands from shaking. The king unfolded the paper. He read in silence first, his expression shifting slowly, subtly. Confusion, doubt, something darker. Whispers began to stir. After a long moment he spoke. "This letter states that the child of Lady Isolde Rowan survived the fire." The hall erupted. Gasps, cries, incredulous murmurs. Seraphina closed her eyes, a tear gathering at the corner. The king lifted his hand for silence, though his own voice carried tension now. "It further states," he continued slowly, "that the child was removed from the ruins by a man loyal to the Rowan family and taken to a distant village for protection." Elara felt her breath stop. Protection. Like a veil pulled over a life. Adrian's hand tightened around hers. The king's voice lowered, grave. "The child was left with a caretaker whose name is recorded here." Every whisper fell dead. Elara thought she heard her own heartbeat. The king read the name, Marian Winford. Quote, the floor shifted beneath Elara. Her mother's name spoken aloud by a king. Her legs nearly gave beneath her. Adrian steadied her quickly, pulling her closer without hesitation. Seraphina pressed a hand to her mouth, stunned. The hall roared with whispers. "It's her. She's the child." The resemblance, impossible. The king raised his voice above the chaos. Silence. The room froze. "Elara Winford," he said, turning toward her with a solemn expression. "According to this letter, your mother was not your birth mother, but the caretaker entrusted to protect Lady Isolde's daughter." Elara could not speak. She could not breathe. Her entire world seemed to fold inward, collapsing under the weight of 2 decades. Seraphina approached slowly, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I knew it," she whispered. "I felt it the moment I saw you." But the king did not look victorious. He looked troubled. "There is more," he said. "More?" Elara's heart quivered painfully. The king lifted the letter again, scanning the final lines. The document references a secondary note, a contradiction. Adrian stiffened. "Contradiction?" "Yes." The king's voice darkened. The final line states that the caretaker, Marian Winford, was one of 2 women considered. The text cuts off before confirming a final decision. The hall stilled. Elara blinked, disoriented. "This means—" Lady Hawthorne stepped forward, seizing the opportunity with a cold gleam in her eye. "It means, Your Majesty, that Miss Winford might be the child." She paused. "Or she might have been placed in that household accidentally." The murmurs swelled again, louder, sharper. Elara felt a cold wave wash over her. "So I could be her, or not her." "Yes," the king said softly. "The truth is incomplete." Adrian's arm circled her shoulders, steadying her. "This is not enough to name her an heir." "No," the king agreed, "nor is it enough to dismiss the possibility." The room erupted again. "This cannot stand. We need certainty." "What of the other child?" "She must be examined." A council member stepped forward. Your Majesty, we must confirm her identity before tomorrow's wedding. The court demands clarity. Adrian turned sharply. She is not an item to be inspected. Lady Hawthorne lifted her chin. The court's stability is at stake. Then I will protect its stability, the king said firmly. We will not declare her lineage tonight. Sheropinosh Fochefel. But, the king continued, neither will we deny it. Until further evidence is found, Miss Winford will remain a guest of Stormvale and under Lord Valamon's direct protection. Adrian bowed his head slightly. You have my word, sire. Gasps rippled through the hall. Ilara could barely stand. Her life had changed in minutes, expanded, and broken all at once. The brooch, the whispers, her mother's silence, the faces that looked at her as though she belonged to a story she never lived. She felt Adrian guide her away from the platform, his arm a firm, unwavering support. As they stepped into the quieter corridor beyond the hall, her voice finally escaped in a trembling whisper. Adrian, if I'm not the child they think I am, then who am I? He turned to face her, the lantern light catching the fierce certainty in his eyes. You are Ilara Winford, he said softly. And no letter, no council, no crown will ever decide your worth. Her eyes burned. For the first time since stepping into Stormvale, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief, terror, longing, and hope, all tangled together. The truth was unfinished. So was she, and the night was not yet over. Ilara could still hear the echoes of the great hall as Adrian guided her through Stormvale's quieter passageways. Each footstep felt unsteady, as though she were walking through a world newly fractured. The candlelit corridors blurred. Distant voices softened into indistinct murmurs behind thick stone walls. When Adrian stopped, she realized they had arrived at a terrace overlooking the inner gardens. Winter air brushed against her cheeks, cool and bracing. Lanterns hung from the carved archway cast gentle golden light across the balcony, illuminating Adrian's face more solemn now, the lines around his eyes drawn tight. Ilara, he said softly, sit for a moment. You've carried more than anyone should in a single day. She sank onto the low stone bench. I don't know what I am anymore, she whispered. A possibility, a mistake, a rumor in a letter someone wrote to unsettle everyone. Jusolo. Adrian sat beside her, close enough that she felt the steady warmth of him. You are not a rumor, and you are not a mistake. She clasped her hands together tightly. But the king said it himself, the truth is incomplete. I could be the child they lost, or I could be someone else entirely. Either way, the court will never leave me in peace. Adrian turned slightly toward her, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. Then forget the court, forget the crown, think only of yourself. Come. She met his eyes, startled. Of myself? Adrian? I don't even remember who I was 24 hours ago. Then start with who you are now, he said softly. A woman who walked into Stormvale without fear, who endured whispers and stares with dignity, who faced a king and did not crumble. That is who you are. Her breath trembled in her chest. I didn't feel brave. You were, he murmured. Bravery is not loud. Sometimes it's simply choosing to breathe in a moment that tries to suffocate you. Ilara leaned back slightly, letting the cool night air soothe her nerves. The gardens below shimmered with frost. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of faint music drifted through the halls, the musicians practicing for the wedding ceremony at dawn. I keep thinking about my mother, she said quietly. Marion Winford. If she was the caretaker the letter mentioned, then she carried this secret alone for decades. Adrian nodded. Perhaps she believed secrecy would protect you. And perhaps it did, Ilara whispered. Or perhaps it trapped me in a life that was never mine. You said you were happy in Brindlebrook, he reminded gently. Yes, she breathed. But happiness built on silence. I don't know what to make of it now. Adrian considered this carefully, then said, Your mother loved you. That much is clear. Everything beyond that, intentions, decisions, the truth behind her silence, those are questions no council can answer. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself. I want to hate her, and yet I can't. Hate has no place where love has lived, Adrian said. Not truly. His words settled inside her with quiet resonance. After a moment, she turned to him. And you? What did you think when the king read the letter? Adrian hesitated, not out of doubt, but because he weighed his answer with care. I thought, he said finally, that regardless of what name they try to place upon you, I see you, the real you, and I will stand beside you no matter what truth emerges. Ilara's chest tightened. You say that as if it's simple. It is, he replied softly. And it has been for some time. Quote, she felt her heartbeat pick up slow at first, then faster, as his meaning settled over her like the warmth of his presence. The lantern light flickered, and in its glow, Adrian reached out, taking her hand in a gesture so gentle it nearly unraveled her. Ilara, he said, voice steady, I brought you here because I feared facing Stormvale alone, but somewhere between the carriage and tonight's chaos, I stopped fearing anything so long as you were near. She inhaled sharply. Adrian, I do not care whether you are a Rowan, he said, or a Winford, or the child of no noble house at all. I care that you are kind, and brave, and honest in ways this court has forgotten how to be. Her lips parted with emotion she struggled to contain. I don't know what happens tomorrow. I don't know who I am supposed to be. Then choose, he whispered. She blinked. Choose? He lifted her hand to his chest, pressing her palm over his heartbeat. Choose the life you want, the path you want, the person you want beside you. Her eyes widened as everything inside her, softened, uncoiled, melted into something she no longer tried to resist. Adrian, she breathed. Are you asking? Yes, he said quietly, though perhaps not in the way I should. He let go of her hand long enough to kneel before her, not in ceremony, nor with any grand facade, but with sincerity unburdened by rank or fear. His eyes held hers with unwavering devotion. Ilara Winford, Adrian said, his voice steady and full of quiet intensity. Whatever truth tomorrow reveals, I want my future to begin with you, not with lineage or rumor, but with choice. My choice. If your heart has room for me, will you walk that future with me? A warm tear fell onto her cheek, unexpected. But welcome, she whispered. Yes. He rose slowly, relief and happiness softening every line in his face. When he leaned in, she met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, unhurried, woven from everything the day had broken apart and everything the night had healed. When they parted, he held her close, resting his forehead against hers. You've changed everything, he murmured. And you've given me a place to belong, she whispered. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in the quiet peace of the winter night. Then, from somewhere deep within Stormvale's main hall, a bell chimed 3 low peals, signaling the final preparations for Dawn's wedding ceremony. Ilara lifted her head. Tomorrow, they'll ask me to stand before them again. Adrian brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Then you will, and I'll be with you. She exhaled slowly, letting her fears settle into something manageable. What if the truth remains unfinished? He smiled gently. Then we build a new truth. Together, Coco. Ilara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, letting herself feel something she had denied all day: safety, not granted by Stormvale or any council, but by one person who saw her beyond name, beyond rumor, beyond fear, and in the quiet, her heart whispered something she had not allowed herself to believe until now. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it not as a legend's echo or a noble's curiosity, but as herself, Ilara Winford, a woman no longer defined by uncertainty, but by the courage of choosing her own path. With Adrian Valamon at her side, the night settled softly around them, and the future, though still clouded by unanswered questions, no longer felt like a void. It felt like a beginning.